Hi, Salina Brown. I am so happy to have you today as a guest on UnFounded. Our topic today is square peg, round hole. And when I think about identity and the powerful role that it plays in startup culture, I can't think of anyone else that I'd rather talk about this with than you. And I am so happy to have you here today. We are going to tackle this topic with just three questions. One looks to the past, one speaks to the present, and the third leans to the future. As you know, we've given each other a sneak peek into questions 1 and 2 about the past and the present. Question 3, the what about the future? That one's the wild card, and we have not shared that with each other in advance. As you also know, no formal bios on this show, but for anyone watching or listening, you can read about Salina's incredible experience as a designer, as an innovator, as an entrepreneur in the show notes. But instead of a bio, I've asked Salina to pick 3 words to describe herself before we jump into the conversation. So Salina, 3 words.
3 words. Okay. Designer, mom, queer, and I have to add a 4th word, Black.
Well, Salina, who am I to imprison you with my rules of only 3 words, since we're here to talk about breaking free with new identity. So there you have it. I now know that part of your identity is 4 words. You're a 4-word kind of person. So, well, those words I think are knowing you. They are a reasonable description, but certainly so much more to you than those 3 words could possibly encompass. So, all right, Salina, get into your time machine. I'm going to ask you to look backwards for this question. Boop, 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 boop. So, looking back, the adoration of archetypal persona, it was such a huge part of startup culture and history. The hacker, the hustler, the hype man, the underdog. I think it's been so easy for entrepreneurs to be defined by those roles rather than be revising and refining them. And I think now we're finally starting to talk about how incredibly unwelcoming these archetypes were to, well, mostly everyone, except the dudes and those coming from networks of privilege. So it's the beginning of that conversation. What was your experience bumping up against these archetypes, and how do you think it's impacted your journey?
Thank you for asking that. Because when I saw the question, I didn't realize that there was friction, right? Because these lived experiences, you don't necessarily do that kind of introspective work in the moment. It's often when you get to reflect. So it wasn't until you asked that question that I realized that archetype was constraining. I also think because I have a queer identity, there's a gendered kind of function, right, in that archetype that I often dismiss because I've had to dismiss kind of the gendered norms since preschool, right? So I don't necessarily, I didn't think about it in that way initially, but I can see how it did shape how I showed up, and limited how I showed up. And my translation of those terms, like hacker, hipster, and hustler, the hustler piece felt, and maybe again the context was different, didn't feel too far from how I thought about my work because I had to hustle. Right?
Yeah.
So I took those archetypes. I always blended and found identity within that, as opposed to identifying with one track or the other. So yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, and I might have been participating in reinforcing that now that I think about it, because I wasn't critically thinking about the boundaries. Because I don't know that I often think about it. And I think we've come to like a point in our society where we've matured around, identity politics and kind of formalized language around that, and brought that into kind of conversations that didn't necessarily make space for that. Everything from pop culture to kind of corporate. So yeah, I'm going to pause there, because yeah, what was your experience?
Well, is that my question?
Oh, I'm cheating.
I set this up this way because all I do is talk. So I
Okay.
think your point about retrospection, and maybe that's the moment we're living in, is really as a time of as individuals and change agents, we're really still looking back at our own experience to help us be better advocates, right? Looking forward. So I think anybody listening is going to get your gist on that one for sure.
Yeah.
All right, you got to hit me up with your question about the past. And you can change it. You can make it that if you want.
No, I mean, you introduced it in a concept that was not necessarily at the forefront for me. So what was that experience for you?
Well, I think like you, it's a very recent phenomena that I'm even looking back at it. I mean, I didn't live my life that way. I didn't have the time for it. Like a little bit about my backstory. I was the first person to go to college. Like I had to hustle, and I had a lot of privilege. Just going into it, but not compared to a lot of people I was racing against around me. I think I absorbed a lot of those identities and tried to play with them and smush them together and fit myself into them. I think probably where it had the most detrimental effect on me as a professional was around imposter syndrome, because I never fully looked like those other identities. I think I never felt honestly comfortable in those clothes, or that I didn't deserve to wear those clothes. I now realize I didn't feel comfortable in those clothes because those clothes are not one size fits all. And really, I'm my own identity, and I borrow a lot from different identities, particularly as a generalist. But I think probably the biggest impact was, it's taken me a really long time to feel proud of my work and to feel like I genuinely deserve to be part of the conversation, and that I wasn't just borrowing one of these costumes from the archetypal library and kind of masquerading with bits and pieces of that. So I think the biggest impact was probably on self-esteem and on that feeling all the time that the other shoe was going to drop, or I was going to get found out, or I was going to just fuck something up so bad that I was going to get booted off the island. And I think that's the thing about identity, right? But I would say on the positive side, I'm very conscious of it, and now I think I give others that I work with more freedom and flexibility to not have to align themselves so strictly with one of the roles that we've come to value so highly in startup land, right? Like to recognize that maybe there's like roles that were always there, but we just didn't have names for them, or roles that we didn't need then that we need now, and now we're developing a new language for that. So I think on the positive side, I think it's given me the ability to be a much more open thinker with a new generation of entrepreneurs about the role that identity plays in business building, and really trying to flip that around and see it as more of an asset. And how do you use that to create energy and excitement inside your company, and rather than try to constantly be apologizing for who doesn't look the way that they're supposed to look. So all right, we're back to today, the terra firma of now. So we're thinking about today. So it's questions about the present.
Okay.
Salina, what can advocates and allies do to accelerate the pace of change and create more space for different identities to be seen and respected and valued in our startup culture?
So that's a funny question, right? Because I don't know that we can define it, because culture doesn't necessarily get defined, right? It's emergent. So I feel like I'm hopeful that the future is different. I'm hopeful that the people coming into the market are forcing change, change that I was never that I couldn't even identify. I couldn't see because I had normalized it so much. And then I don't know that I can even deliver be the kind of change that they're going to be, right? I can't imagine it, because my mental models, my paradigms are so rooted in these concepts that I've normalized. So I'm hopeful, right? I don't imagine that we can lead that effort. I think we need to follow as much as possible, and let them lead. I think there are groups that do not have voices that I hope that we create space for, because I feel like it's not as simple as a marginalized group. It's just kind of the folks on the fringes, right? There's a lot of innovation there to just survive. You have to do so much to be safe, to get access, right? There's just a couple of hurdles, and I think those hurdles kind of in those hurdles, in that effort, there are threads, there are new paradigms, there are new models that will become emergent and take shape. So I never think about it as like something that we can proactively do. I think that the thing that like we can proactively define, I think the thing that we can do is just kind of create space for it to become what it becomes. Because I think when we try to define it, we often screw it up. And I don't think we can possibly define it, what's to come, because we have no perspective. Our paradigms are so screwed. Like I completely normalized this hacker, hipster, and hustler. And it wasn't until you stated that question that I was just like, oh my God, what did I do? What did that mean? What did I perpetuate? Who did I not protect? Who did I silence, right? So yeah, I don't know that there's a clear recommendation other than we have to create space, and we have to be uncomfortable, and we have to feel, we have to fall on our face, and, and sit in the truth of what we kind of perpetuated. I think that that's the hardest thing to do.
And that maybe like, not like the not fixing it, not thinking that narcissism, right? That we have the fix, right? For the next generation. Like that's probably,
I don't think we could possibly have the fix.
Important.
I think of groups that that I think are in the best position to fix it is I look to the trans community, specifically the trans community of color. I mean, this is a group that has, is defying gravity, and pushing for like unimaginable change, from like body to health, to healthcare, to how we think about sports, right? So I think in those most, the folks on the fringe represent the opportunity for the most change, can bring the most change to.
That makes sense. I feel you.
Yeah.
Sometime we'll in another episode talk about the that whole idea about not bequeathing onto the new generation your coping mechanisms. That actually, like, don't assume that like they're gonna even take as much bullshit as you did, and that they're gonna even want to cope with it. And instead, like I had a whole realization about working with women founders about me not bequeathing to them my coping behaviors. Instead, they're taking more, more fight. So okay, hit me up with your question about the present.
What are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful for a lot. I think what you just said about listening and making space, it's not natural for me, and some of that I think is might comes from that, in that just that sense of privilege that like actually just mostly white people have, that we're supposed to be involved in everything. And then we can be do-gooders if we we get involved in a good way. I think it's when I think about my work with a new generation of entrepreneurs, I am becoming more and more cognizant of the risks of problem solving through the lens of my experience, and still finding places to jump in and help. And if you like see them falling off a cliff, like reaching out, and like there's an extreme version of that where I don't think we need to let everyone feel everything the way that we felt it. But I think your point about making space, and I am really hopeful about how aggressive and assertive and bullish people on the outside are being about taking that space. Younger women, some of the women founders I work with are some of the most annoying founders I've ever worked with. Like they just they're so annoying, and I just want, like, sometimes I want to like throttle them. But I'm really seeing that it kind of in the upside down, and in aggregate, I think we're seeing those changes, and I am hopeful about that. It's uncomfortable sometimes, and it's rough, and it's disruptive, and I think it's not. And I certainly don't envy those people on that frontier, right? Who still get brutalized all the time. I mean, even in my experience, I still see just horrendous things are said and done to me all the time in professional contexts. Mostly by the older men that I work with. But I'm really hopeful that it's just the sheer like brass balls that I just like, I'm kind of like, I'm hopeful about that. And it's a very, I think it's what's gonna keep the momentum. So, okay, Salina, buckle up. Time for another time jump. We are headed to the future. I know. I need to get like a sound effect machine, like some kind of like Back to the Future sound effect. Like, I can imagine someone listening to this and thinking like, "Oh my God, if she makes that boop boop noise one more time." So I think if we lock in, maybe lock arms, right, there really is going to be some cultural sea change here. And I think your concept about culture, you don't change it; it kind of changes you. Like, it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. And I do think we can keep this genie out of the bottle around building more inclusive ecosystems. Speaking of bequeathing, what's one change that you would most want to secure for future generations, if you could bequeath it or secure it for them today?
Oh, Jesus, not Jesus. That's not the change.
Not more cowbell and not more Jesus.
No. That's a hard one. Because I try so hard not to.
Right, because you don't know what they want, right? So true. It's kind of and now it's kind of a stupid question given everything you said, but
no, I don't think it's stupid. Yeah. But there's a value piece here, and I wonder if that's the way to think about it. Okay, what value to carry forward? I want to say that it feels like we're at. There's a lot of tension, right? There's a lot of momentum that has, was born out of the tension that erupted over the past, I want to say 8 years, because I don't think it's as simple as one presidency. I think that inertia had been building through the Obama administration, right? All of the kind of, this is divisive, whatever that means. I hope that continues to spread. Like the globalization of that is a key part of how people move forward versus the localization of it. I think because I feel like that is new in comparison to like the civil rights movement, the suffrage movement. Those are very local, right? And so those norms and those ideas kind of remained local for the most part. We didn't understand how they translated to other cultures. So I think that is absolutely new to our society, and it's a function of technology. It's a function that, we're all kind of hyper connected. And I'm curious to see how that really kind of evolves, because there's a lot to reconcile there, right? From
that's really interesting.
I don't, to kind of localize it will inadvertently kind of make it kind of Western centric, which is not the goal.
Yeah, and it'll mutate in ways good and bad, and it'll be very different in a globalized state instead of a hyper local state. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to be connected to like Black Panthers and folks who can reflect on the civil rights movement. And the thing that they said that struck me was like, they've never seen kind of the world respond in the way that they did. And I didn't have that context to know that wasn't normal, right? And that was a new dimension to how we're thinking about these problems. And that's just amazing. Right?
Yeah, and certainly with the globalization of entrepreneurship, right? And building companies now with distributed, you can really see how all that is poised to like really, it's going to be, it won't all be good, but it will be substantively, functionally, cosmetically different than some of the last iterations on revolution that we've had. Yeah. Damn, drop the mic. All right.
What?
Girl, launch me into tomorrow. Ask me about the future. I've got my crystal ball. I'm ready.
What kind of founders do you think this will create?
I am so excited already about the diversification of the founder identity, like who gets to use it, who even gets to call themselves that, who's electing not to call themselves that, right? In an act of protest, right? And coming up with new names that liberate them maybe from the baggage that comes with the label founder, right? Like, be a builder, be something else. Like I'm seeing so much change. I mean, I worry for those who don't have safety nets. I know from my own experience how high risk entrepreneurship is, how most things fail, and the cost of those failures. We have a hard time talking about them comfortably, because for the first generation of founders, most of them had something to fall back on, right? They had college educations, they had familial wealth, they could go get jobs in other startups. And for those that are coming out of less privileged networks into startup culture, and in many communities already being entrepreneurs, we just didn't bless them with the titles. I mean, there's whole communities that had to build their own businesses because no one else was going to build them for them anyway, since the dawn of time, right? So, but the owners of the narrative just didn't bequeath those titles. So I'm really excited about just a whole new explosion of the identity itself. And I think even for me, I still think the word founder, even though I have been one, feels weird. I feel like just because so much in the narrative kind of comes stuffed into it that then you have to unpack and kind of shed, right? Whether it's about how you're going to fundraise or not fundraise, whether you're going to be a unicorn or you just want to build a really big business, like all of the eye rolls and narrative that comes with it. I think this new generation of founders is diversifying in such a way that they just have no interest in that, and not bringing, it's like the whole Louis Vuitton luggage suite of baggage. They're just leaving it at the curb. Like like moving on with like bare minimalist gear in backpacks. And I think in the future, just even how we bequeath benight people with that is going to become so much less precious. And I think in doing so, ultimately, demystify and de-heroicize it too. Like this, I think we've gone a little crazy with you're only an innovator or a hero if you're a founder. I mean, do you know how many businesses would fail if the founders didn't have really talented people to like go on the ride with them? Like I think the whole concept of how businesses get built, hierarchies, the kind of adoration of the founder and the investor and the mentor as these I think in general, this new generation is just gonna like through everything from crowdfunding to globalization, through distributed teams, through just new concepts of ownership and things like blockchain. I mean, you name it, how we think about ownership, connectivity, contribution. I mean, the gig economy is a great example of a whole generation of people that just no longer think that they need only do one thing. People are doing many things at once. And so maybe one is that you're technically a founder, but the other one you're a contributor. I just think the whole thing's flattening really fast. And it's in some ways, it's taking away some of the ceremony, some of the pomp and circumstance, and it's deprivileging people who had a tight grip on the power associated with those titles, should they be granted to you, right? Serial entrepreneur, like third time founder, highly funded guy. Like I think it's getting flat. And now it's going to be like, what'd you do? How'd you do it? Right. And did you get paid, man? So I'm really excited about just maybe never using the word founder again. Like instead having a much broader set of words and toolkits to describe all of the entrepreneurial persona that go into innovation and that go into making, new things work. Because maybe because it's what fits you better, but it's just so narrow. So I'm really excited about kind of, burning the whole thing down. And coming up with a whole new language that I like, that works for me. But to your point, I think already we're seeing new generations of entrepreneurs just picking new words to describe themselves and changing titles and deciding to define themselves in ways that we sometimes don't like because they don't match our norms. I mean, you and I, how many times did we talk about the co-CEO thing one time when we were working together, right? And how that just and now I look back at that, I'm like, why was I so bent about that? Why was I so bent about that, right? There's just so much going on there that I think it's just going to flatten. So, all right, I'm going off now. I can feel myself sliding off the rails, and that's it. We have come, we're back with a time machine has gone around the world, and we're back in our day-to-day world now and going back to doing our other things. So that's it. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I can't wait to see you again in person. It kills me. Some of my friends and most beloved colleagues are 40 miles away, and I still can't see you, but so soon we'll be there. So thanks again, Salina, and I can't wait to talk with you soon.
Thank you so much for this.